Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Let's begin our service, as we always do, with just a little bit of warming up. So you can join with me at home. Shalom, everyone. We're going to begin our service together on page 186. Modeh lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. Thanks to you, Adonai, ever living sovereign, that you have restored my soul to me in mercy. How great is your trust. Turn now to page 192, Matovu. Matovu alecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. Turn now to page 194 and offer a blessing for our bodies together in Hebrew at the top of the page. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher yatzar et adam bechokma, ubaravo nekabim nekabim, chalulim chalulim. Galui biyadua livnei chisech vodecha, she'im yipatech echad mehem, o yisatem echad mehem, yefshar litkayem la'amod lefanecha. Baruch atah Adonai rofech chol basar u'mafli la'asot. Turn now to page 196, a prayer for our souls. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehorahi. 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 Please join with me on the top of page 197. Matter is never destroyed, only transformed. So too can the soul evolve higher and higher, from instinct to inspiration, haughtiness to holiness, selfishness to service, from individualism to union, to join with the soul of souls, the infinite one. As the soul is magnified and sanctified, so is the infinite one exalted. Baruch atah Adonai, asher bi'ado nefesh kol chai, veruach kol besar ish. We're now on page 198, and we rise in body or spirit. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lasach b'bina lavchin beyom u'belayla. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamechin mitzadei gaber. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten le'ahem koach. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamavir she'ena meinai u'tnuma me'af apai. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani b'tzelem Elohim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, ozer Yisrael bikura. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, oter Yisrael betifara. If you're still standing at home, please be seated as we turn to page 205, and we'll read together the top of the page, a blessing for the study of Torah. We seekers of God, how do we find you? In good deeds and in the study of Torah. In your search for us, you find us in the bending of the knee, in the rigor of study and the honesty of commerce, through a good heart, through decency and respect, true fellowship, companionship, and love, through truth and peace, and the no that is really no, and the yes that is really yes. Baruch atah Adonai, hamelamed Torah le'amo Yisrael. Now on page 206. Elu demarim she'ein lahem shiur, she'adam ochel perotehem ba'olam hazeh, ve'al keren kayemet lo le'olam haba, ve'elu hen kibud avaim, ugmilut chasadim, ve'hashkamahat beit hamidrash shacharit ve'aravit, ve'achlasat orchim u'ikor cholim, והכנסת כלה וביאת המת ועיון תפילה והבת שלום בין אדם לחברו ותלמוד תורה כנגד כולם. We rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 212 for the opening blessing of Pezukei de Zimra. Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam baruch hu, Baruch Hoseh Bereshit, Baruch Omer V'Yosem, Baruch Gozer U'Mekayem, Baruch Merachem al Haaretz, Baruch Merachem al Habriot, Baruch Meshalem Sachar Tov L'Re'av, Baruch Alad B'Kayam Lanetzach, Baruch Bodeh U'Matzil, Baruch Shemo, Bishpachot u'Bizmirot Negadelcha, U'Nshabecha Nepayecha V'Naskir Shimcha V'Namlichecha, Malkeinu Eloheinu, Yachid Chei Olamim, Melech Meshuach U'Mefuad Yad Shemo HaGadol, Baruch atah Adonai, Melech Mehulal, Batishpachot. If you're still standing at home, please be seated. We're on page 214, the second line down from the top of the page. Tov lehodot l'Adonai, Tov lehodot l'Adonai, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon, Tov lehodot l'Adonai, חסדך, להגיד בבוקר חסדך, ואמונתך בלילות, ואמונתך בלילות, טוב להודות לאדוני. עלי אסור ולנבל, עלי היגיון בכינור, כי שימחתני אדוני בפועלך, במעשה ידיך ארנם. מה גדלו מעשיך ים, מאוד עמקו מחשבותיך. מה גדלו מעשיך ים, מאוד עמקו מחשבותיך. מה גדלו מעשיך ים, מאוד עמקו מחשבותיך. And now on page 215. Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha, Hodi Hallelujah, Hodi Hallelujah. Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha, Selah. Continue silently to the bottom of the page and on to the next. ואנחנו נברך יה, מעתה ועד עולם, מעתה ועד עולם, מעתה ועד עולם, הללויה, הללויה, הללויה. Hallelujah, hallelujah. We're now on page 218, the 150th Psalm. Hallelujah, 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 el mekocho, hallelujah, berkiauzo, hallelujah, bigvurotav, hallelujah, kerokudo, hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 beteka shofar, hallelujah, benebel bechinor, hallelujah, betofu machol, hallelujah, beminim beruga, hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 שמעתי הללויה, הללו, 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 הללויה. נשמת כל חי, תברך את שמך אדוני אלוהינו. Continue silently on page 219 to the bottom of the page. On page 220. Ilufinu male shira kayam ul shoneinu rina kamon galam vesiftotenu shebach kemacheve rakia vehinenu mehirot kashemesh vechayareach וידינו פרוסות כנשרי שמיים, ורגלינו קלעות כחיילות. אין אנחנו מספיקים להודות לך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו, לברך שלום. On page 222, the second paragraph in Hebrew. Shochen ad marom v'kadosh shemo v'chatu rehanenu tzadikim b'Adonai la'yesharim na'avat tehilah v'fi yesharim v'tihitalalu direi tzadikim תתברך ובלשון חסידים, תתרוממו בקרב קדושים, תתקדש ובקהלות, רבבות עמך בית ישראל ברינה יתפאר, שמך מלכנו בכל דור ודור. יבבי יבבי ביי ביי ביי, יבבי יבבי ביי ביי, יבבי יבבי ביי ביי ביי, ay You rise in body or spirit as we conclude Pezukei de Zimra on page 223, and then remain standing again in body or spirit through the Chatzi Kaddish on the next page and the Baruch Hu on the page after that. Yishtabach Shimcha Lat Malkeinu Ha'el HaMelech HaGadol HaKadosh B'Shamayim U'Ba'aretz Ki Lecha Na'e Adonai Eloheinu Elokei Avotenu V'Imotenu Shiru Shvacha Halav V'Zimra U'Zimem Shalah Netzach Gedolah U'Gvura Tila V'Tiferet Kedusha U'Malchut Brachot Ve'Hodaot Me'ata V'Ad Olam Baruch Ata Adonai El Melech Gadol Batishbachot El Hodot Adon HaNiflaot Abocher B'Shirei Zimra Melech El Chei HaOlamim Yitkadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah Ve'alma divrach Pirtei V'yalich Malchutei V'chayechonim Yamechonim Chayei Dechol Beit Yisrael B'Hagala V'Zman Kariv V'Yimeru Amen. Yesh Merabah Mevarach Le'alam Le'al Me'al Mayam Yitbarach וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשא בריחו. לילה מן כל ברכתם ושירתם, תושבחתם ונחמתם, לאמירם בעלמם, ואמרו אמן. ברכו את אדוני המבורך. ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד. If you're still standing at home, please be seated as we turn to page 228. We'll begin by reading together in English at the bottom of the page and then the 3 lines in Hebrew just above. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, creator of light and darkness, who makes peace and fashions all things. In mercy you illumine the world and those who live upon it. In your goodness you daily renew creation. How numerous are your works, Adonai, in wisdom you form them all, filling the earth with your creatures. Be praised, Adonai, our God, for the excellent work of your hands, and for the lights you created, may they glorify you. Shine a new light upon Zion, that we all may swiftly merit its radiance. Praised are you, Adonai, creator of all heavenly lights. Or Chadash al Zion Ta'ir. Or Chadash al Zion Ta'ir. V'nizkechu lanu mehera leoro. V'nizkechu lanu mehera leoro. Yadadai bim bim bam, yadadai bim bam, yadadai bim bim bam, yadadai. Yadadai bim bim bam, yadadai bim bam, yadadai bim bim bam, yadadai baruch atah Adonai, yotzer hameorot. Turn now to page 230. We'll begin by reading together in English at the top of the page and in the Hebrew at the bottom. How deeply you have loved us, Adonai our God, gracing us with surpassing compassion. On account of our forebears whose trust led you to teach them the laws of life, be gracious to us, teaching us as well. O merciful one, have mercy on us by making us able to understand and discern, to heed, learn, and teach, and lovingly to observe, perform, and fulfill all that is in your Torah. Ve'ha'ereinu b'toratecha v'dabek libeinu b'mitzvotecha ve'yachel lebabeinu le'ahava u'lirah et shemecha ve'lo nevosh ve'lo nikalem ve'lo nikashel le'olam va'ed ki v'shem kodechecha Hagadol v'anora batachnu Nagila v'nismecha v'yeshuatecha Ve'avienu le'shalom Me'arba kanfot haaretz Le'tolichenu komemiut le'artzeinu Yel poel Yeshuot ata uvanu bacharta ve'keravtanu le'shimcha hagadol sela be'emet le'odot lecha yechetcha b'ahava baruch atah Adonai habocher b'amo Yisrael v'yava Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. We're now on page 234. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha v'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol me'adecha ve'hayu advarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al vavecha Veshinatam levanecha v'dibartam בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם להיות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בעיניך וכתבתם המזות ביתך ובשעריך. We're now on page 236. ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם ועשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורותם ונתנו על ציצית על כנף פתיל תכלת והיה לכם לציצית וראיתם אותו וזכרתם בכל מצוות אדוני ועשיתם אותם ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם אשר אתם זונים אחריהם למען תזכרו עשיתם את כל מצותי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם אלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אדוני אלוהיכם Emet. We'll read together now at the top of page 239. Emet, there is no place where you are not, even in the wilderness there is your word. Emet, that pen strokes of lightning, white fire, black flame, stir the soul's passion, guide our sacred way, true and enduring as Torah. Your truth for us is certain and established now and forevermore. Like Moses, Miriam, and all Israel, we sing out and rejoice. We're now back on page 238, 4 lines up from the bottom in Hebrew. Tehilot le'elyon baruch hu mevorach Moshe u'Miriam u'bnei Yisrael lechanu shira v'simcha rabba ve'amru chulam michamocha ba'elim Adonai Kamocha nedar v'kodesh Nora tehilot osefelem Ay Shira chadasha shivchu gehulim Leshimcha svatayam Yachad kulam hodu והמליכו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל ופדק נאומך יהודה וישראל גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו קדוש ישראל ברוך אתה אדוני לעל ישראל. We begin the Amidah together on page 242 and then continue silently. Please go at your own pace, and when you're finished, you may be seated. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi agi tehillatcha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. you're still continuing with your silent Amidah, please continue at your own pace and join us when you can. For those that have finished, we rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 324 for the repetition of the Amidah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu Imotenu Elohei Abraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah Ha'el HaGadol HaGibor VeHaNorah El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim Nekoneh HaKol Vezocher Chasdei Avot Ve'imahot Umevii Geula Livnei Bneihem Leman Shemo Be'ahava Melech Ozer Moshiach U'Magen Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Abraham Bezrat Sarah Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai Mechaye Metim Atah Rab Le'Oshia Mor Shiva Ruach Morid HaGashem Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed Mechaye Metim Berachamim Rabim Somech Noplim Verofech Olim Umatir Asurim Umekayem Emunato Nishenei Afar Michamocha Bagivurot Umido Melach Melech Memit Umechaye Umatzmiach Yeshua V'ne'eman Atah L'chayot Metim Baruch Atah Adonai Mechaye HaMetim. Now on page 326. Nekadesh et shimcha ba'olam keshem shemachti shimo to b'shmei marom kachatuv al yad leviyecha v'kara zel zeh ve'amahar Kadosh 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 Adonai Tzevaot Neloch kol haaretz Kevodo Adir Adirinu Adonai Adoninu Madir Shimecha Bechol Haaretz Baruch Kevod Adonai Mimkomo Echadu Eloheinu Hu Avinu Malkeinu Hu Moshienu Vehu Yashmienu Verachamav Le'enei Kol Chai Ani Adonai Elohechem Yimloch Adonai Le'olam Elohayich Zion Ledor Vador Hallelujah. We're now at page 328. Ledor Vador Ledor Vador Ledor Vador Nagid Kolecha Ledor Vador Ledor Vador Ledor Vador Nagid Kolecha Ulenetzach Netzachim Kedushatcha Lakdish Kedushatcha Lakdish V'shimcha Eloheinu mipinu lo yamush Le'olam le'olam va'em Baruch atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. If you're still standing at home, please be seated. We're now on the top of page 329. Yismechu v'malechutecha shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Mekadshe mekadshe shiri Shabbat. Kulam yismeu v'yitagdu mituvecha Shabbat. Nismechu v'malechutecha shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. V'hashvi ratzita bo v'kidashto Shabbat. Chemdat yamim oto kerata Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Zecher lemasei Lemase Bereshit Shabbat, Zecher Lemase Bereshit Shabbat, Ismechu B'malechutecha, Shomrei Shabbat, Vekorei Oneg Shabbat. Eloheinu, Eloi Avotenu v'Imotenu, Ritzei Minuchateinu. Kadeshenu b'mitzvotecha, v'ten lechelkenu b'toratecha, Sahabeinu mituvecha, v'samechenu b'shuatecha, v'taher libeinu. Le'ovtecha b'emet, ve'anchileinu, Adonai Eloheinu. V'yahava u'ratzon Shabbat kodshecha v'nichuva Yisrael mekadesh shemecha. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh haShabbat. Let's turn now to page 330. We'll read together in English. On this Shabbat day, as you graciously receive our prayers, help us to hear your call. Grant us enough health to fulfill our duties and the compassion we need to attend to others. Teach us humility that we may perceive our own faults, and grant us the wisdom to be forgiving of others. Give us the courage to be true to our highest selves and the charity to see the best in those around us. Give us patience enough not to become discouraged, hope enough to overcome all fears for the future, and faith enough to know your presence. O source of blessing, look with favor upon us. May our offerings be acceptable to you. Baruch atah Adonai, she'otcha levadcha bira na'avod. We turn now to page 332. We'll read together in English each of the English paragraphs, concluding each with the Hebrew words Modim Anachnu Lach, offering our thanks and gratitude to God. For the expanding grandeur of creation, worlds known and unknown, galaxies beyond galaxies filling us with awe and challenging our imaginations. Modim Anachnu Lach. For this fragile planet Earth, its times and tides, its sunsets and seasons, Modim Anachnu Lach. For the joy of human life, its wonders and surprises, its hopes and achievements, Modim Anachnu Lach. For human community, our common past and future hope, our oneness transcending all separation, our capacity to work for peace and justice in the midst of hostility and oppression, Modim Anachnu Lach. For high hopes and noble causes, for faith without fanaticism, for understanding of views not shared, Modim Anachnu Lach. For all who have labored and suffered for a fair world, who have lived so that others might live in dignity and freedom, Modim Anachnu Lach. For human liberties and sacred rights, for opportunities to change and grow, to affirm and choose, Modim Anachnu Lach. We pray that we may live not by our fears, but by our hopes, not by our words, but by our deeds. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha u'lechanai lehodot. On page 334, Sim Shalom. Sim Shalom, Tova uvracha, chen v'chesed, v'rachamim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael ha'amecha, barcheinu yotzreinu, kulanu kechad, ve'or panecha, Ki ve'or panecha natata lanu, Adonai Eloheinu. Sim shalom, tova ubracha, chen v'chesed, v'rachamim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael ha'amecha, Torat chaim ve'ahavat chesed, Ve'avat chesed, u'tzedaka uvracha berachamim v'chaim v'shalom. Sim shalom, tova uvracha, Chen v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael amecha ve'tov einecha levarech et amcha Yisrael bechol eit uvechol shah bishlomecha sim shalom tova uvracha chen v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael amecha baruch atah Adonai hamevarech et amo Yisrael b'shalom. Turn now and we'll read together in the bottom of page 336. I need strength, humility, courage, patience, strength to control my passions, humility to assess my own worth, courage to rise above defeats, patience to cleanse myself of imperfections, and wisdom to learn and live by our sacred teachings. Let me not be discouraged by my failings. Let me take heart from all that is good and noble in my character. Keep me from falling victim to cynicism. Teach me sincerity and enthusiasm. Endow me with perception and courage, that I may serve others with compassion and love. Oseh shalom mimromav, uyaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. V'yimeru amen. We rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 362 of Seder Kriyat HaTorah, the Torah service. The ark is open. Ein kamocha b'Elohim Adonai v'ein k'ma'asecha malchut kol olamim u'memshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed. Adonai oz lamo yiten, Adonai yevarech et amo b'shalom. Abba harachamim, eitiva b'rtzoncha et Zion. Tivnei cholat Yerushalayim, ki becha le'ad batachnu, melech el ram v'nisa, Adon olamim. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, udevar Adonai miYerushalayim. Baruch shenatan Torah, Baruch shenatan Torah le'amo Yisrael, v'kdushato. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai echad. Echad Eloheinu gadol, Adonenu kadosh shemo. Galul Adonai iti u'nerhamema shemo yachdav. Lecha Adonai hagedula ve'hagevura ve'hatiferet ve'hanetzach ve'hahod. Ki kol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz, ki kol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz. Lecha Adonai hamamlacha ve'amitnaseh lechol erosh. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishta Lehar Kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu lehar kodsho ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Still standing at home, please be seated. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This morning we begin reading the third book of the Torah, the book of Vayikra, otherwise known as Leviticus. And as we know from past years of study, many past years of study, that Vayikra is often the hardest nut to crack, the book of the Torah that feels the most distant from our day-to-day experience, our day-to-day lives, largely because it deals exclusively, almost exclusively, and in great detail with the priesthood and with particularly the sacrificial worship of our ancestors, both in the desert, in the Mishkan, and eventually in the temples in Jerusalem. And so by its nature, it is graphic, in some cases painful, in some cases really quite challenging, and in other cases contains some of our most sacred ideas, not least of which being the idea that we are called to be a holy people. And a lot of what this book of the Torah is about is sort of understanding what does that concept mean, and how are we meant to achieve this sort of idea of creating both an individual experience of holiness and a community experience of holiness. None of these are simple questions, none of them have simple answers, but certainly are really essential to understanding pretty much every aspect of Judaism that we consider to be our practice Judaism of today has some origin or some connection to this idea of sacrifice, this idea of holiness, this idea of purity and impurity. All of this is really contained within this book, and ultimately draws its greatest connections in this book. So while we may struggle with it, while we as rabbis may look at it sometimes and sort of feel like how are we going to begin to start this conversation, inevitably, I finish the book of Vayikra every year, and I feel like I have an even greater understanding of what it is that Judaism is meant to be for me. Can't speak for others, but for myself. So in a little bit, we'll begin our reading actually with the starting point of chapter 2. So I'll give you the page numbers now and remind you then. If you're in the Plav Chumash, that's page 662. In the Women's Torah Commentary, that's the bottom of page 574. So again, Women's Commentary 574, the Plav Chumash 662, and we'll begin reading about chapter 2. However, I want to sort of talk a little bit more broadly this morning about these ideas of sacrifices in one very interesting piece of the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Olav HaShalom, who wrote a really interesting piece about this week's Parsha. And so he begins by sort of pointing out the fact that most of the sacrifices, all the sacrifices really fall into categories. And those categories have a particular kind of either an intention or a means by which to observe. So generally speaking, the sacrifices were divided up into a few different kinds of sacrifices, both in their purpose and what is being sacrificed. So, for example, some of the sacrifices were meant to be offered regularly, as in every single day, or on a particular holiday in a particular fashion with a particular animal, or a particular, frankincense or bread, or any number of things that are part of the offerings, and each one of them again fitting into a particular category. So the everyday offerings are the kinds of things that make sense that if we're thinking about God and worshiping God, the things that we mean to do each and every day. Some of them are communal in nature, some of them are individual in nature, some of them, as I said, are time-bound. They're meant to be offered in certain cases and not in others, based upon the calendar or based upon the time of day. And as I said, some of them will take the form of animals, and some will take the form of non-living entities. And all of them ultimately offered up by the priests, oftentimes offered up on behalf of others in the Mishkan and eventually in the temple. But one of the major sections of the sacrifices, one of its most common themes, is the idea of using sacrifices as a form of expiation, a form of apology, a form of essentially asking God for forgiveness. And as I said, in certain cases, this is about the individual and a mistake that's made. In certain cases, it's communal. And there is another layer, which is that in some cases, it is about a known violation, right? Doing something consciously and with a certain kind of effort. And then another form that is in Hebrew referred to as bishgaga, which is a violation that is done without awareness of having done that violation. So that phrase actually refers back, will eventually reappear in a few months when we get to the high holidays, because Judaism has a different way of approaching the idea of mistakes that are made or offenses that are made with consciousness and those that are made ultimately without. But in the case of bishgaga, in the case of something that's done without, well, one might assume that the answer is to simply let that person off the hook because they didn't know any better, that they didn't intend to do anything wrong. The Torah says that that's not really the way that these kinds of situations can operate. That in fact, even if it's done bishgaga, the offering itself that's necessary may be less than the offering that is necessary for somebody who consciously does something wrong. But there is still a necessary step of expiation. There is a necessary step of apologizing, seeking apology, and ultimately making a restitution for the damage that was done, in this case in the form of a sacrifice that is offered to God. Because again, remember, in most cases what we're talking about here are not the kinds of violations that occur between me and my fellow human being, but more violations that occur between me and the expectations of what God lays before us. So this big section of sort of apologetic sacrifice is really quite significant. And this is where Sachs's teaching comes in this week, and he points out that basically there are 4 different circumstances in which what is called a sin offering is offered as a means of making up for something. And that these different categories are for the different kinds of people who are in a position to make certain kinds of mistakes. The first is the high priest, in other words, the head of the religious body of the children of Israel. The second is what's called the whole community, which, depending on how you read the text, can be either a reference to when there is a communal mistake, for example, the golden calf, or in certain cases, the traditional understanding has to reference to what is really the Zakanim, eventually what's called the Sanhedrin, the people basically who are chosen as a sort of collective to lead and deal with right, if the high priest is dealing with the religious aspects of things, the quote-unquote whole community in this case is really the judicial arm, right, dealing with adjudication of disputes and things of that nature. So when they make a mistake, there's a way of expiating, and it's different and distinct for them. The third is for what's called the Nasi. The Nasi is ultimately the leader. It really means a prince, but it becomes a designation for basically the heads of each of the tribes. And eventually down the road, it refers to actually the sort of, I guess, Roman-accepted leader of the Jewish people in the land of Israel under Roman rule. That's for a separate conversation. But in any case, it's considered basically the political leadership, right? The one that is distinct from the religious leadership, but nonetheless holds a lot of power. And then the fourth is for basically everybody else, the rest of us, right? And we each have a different kind of way of offering. So what Sachs points out is that in 3 of the 4 cases in the Hebrew, the law that's introduced uses the word im in Hebrew. And the word im is if. In other words, if the high priest, right, or if the whole community, or if the average individual does something wrong, this is what you do, and this is the offering that you make in order to take care of it. In the case, however, of the Nasi, we get a different word. We get the word asher. And asher in Hebrew means when. So there's a very big difference between the case of the high priest, or the courts, or the whole community, or the individual. Right? In those cases, the Torah is sort of thinking, well, if a circumstance arises where something is done wrong, then here's what you do to make up for it. But as soon as we start talking about the political leader of the equation, or I should, rather than say political leader, the a-religious leader, right? The leader who's responsible for leading the people outside of the religious identity. In this case, the text switches and it says when, implying that it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. It's a question of only the timing of, not a question of its certainty. In other words, that there is an expectation that a high priest, that the courts, that an individual, right, there's no reason why to assume that they're going to make any kind of mistake. So you really only have to have a conditional response. But in the case of a leader, in the case of a nasi, in case of somebody who is meant to lead in that way, it's not a question of if. It's simply a question of when. And in the end, it is a certainty. It is a probability. And as Sachs points out, even an occupational hazard of the role. So ultimately speaking, we're dealing with, again, something that resembles a certainty that if one is in a leadership position of that sort, there is an inevitability of fault, an inevitability of mistake that will come. And therefore, the Torah needs to address this up front, it needs to address it in a very certain kind of way. So Sachs continues, therefore, he argues the Jewish approach to leadership is somewhat of an unusual combination of both realism and idealism. Realism in its acknowledgement that leaders inevitably make mistakes. Idealism in its constant subordination of politics to ethics, power to responsibility, pragmatism to the demands of conscience. What matters is not that leaders never get it wrong. That is inevitable given the nature of leadership. But that they are always exposed to prophetic critique, and that they constantly study Torah to remind themselves of transcendent standards and ultimate aims. The most important thing from a Torah perspective is that a leader is sufficiently honest to admit his mistakes, hence the significance of the sin offering. As he concludes, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the great rabbi who is credited really in essence with saving Judaism by negotiating a means by which to start anew in Yavne after Jerusalem is destroyed by the Romans, ultimately sums it up with a brilliant double entendre on the word asher. Okay, remember going back to our when a leader sins. He instead relates it to the word ashrei, happy. Happy is ultimately to say that happy is the generation, ashrei hador, whose leader is willing to bring a sin offering for his mistakes. In other words, here again the brilliance of the rabbis to play around with the language of the Torah is to say that the expectations placed upon the leader, the assumption of mistake, and therefore the expectation that a sacrificial offering needs to be in place and there needs to be a mechanism by which to take responsibility and to make reparations, ultimately speaking, leads to a healthier and happier society. And that the Torah is greatly concerned of, in particular, political leadership, distinct from religious leadership, in which usually the responsibility is to the people, and the concern about behavior is to the people. And therefore, there needs to be some mechanism, especially in the public eye, in which when that leader inevitably makes their mistake, that there is some mechanism, some means by which to both demonstrate the taking of responsibility and to also demonstrate the willingness in that responsibility to offer up something of significance to themselves to show that they realize that damage has been done and that in many cases an irreparable kind of damage. Now we, of course, may feel very uncomfortable with the idea that the person makes the mistake and the animal sacrifice is the one to pay the price. I can't argue against that particular point. There are many conversations to be had, of which we'll probably get into in Torah study, about whether or not it's proper or not. But as a reminder, again, that in the ancient world, your animals were your, not just your property, they were your life. In other words, the owning of an animal was usually life-giving, life-sustaining. So it, in essence, is the same thing as we would consider today to be our money, right? The means by which we live. And when somebody does something that breaks the law or breaks a covenant of some sort or another, there is a need for a financial restitution, not simply for an apology, because only through that act can you ultimately try to bring a sense of what, in legal terms is wholeness, or in our terms is shalom. So again, we may disagree with the mechanism, but if we use our ancient eye towards what the society looked like at the time, offering up one's own animals as a sacrifice is a way of basically diminishing one's self and one's standing in the public eye. So I think that it's the key takeaway from Sachs's teaching and the key takeaway from this idea is just simply to say that we have an obligation, a Jewish obligation, as Sachs says, to hold ethics over positions of power, to make sure that people's behavior, even the people that we respect or love or voted for or elect as leadership of a community, right? Even for the people that we are connected with, it's maybe even especially for them. We have to hold every decision accountable and every person accountable. And it's part of the reason why leadership is very hard, and unfortunately the reason why a lot of people tend to abuse
the offices or the power that is given to them is because they don't feel like there is anybody really holding them accountable, that they can get away with it because they're the ones in power. But our Torah reminds us that whatever that sort of illusion is of power is only granted by the willingness of everyone around to accept the behavior. And so in this case, we build from the ground up and saying that a Jewish society is one that must expect more of its leadership. So much so that if they are going to make a mistake, which inevitably is going to be the case, we need to hold them accountable, but just as importantly, we also need to give them the means by which to take accounting of their behavior and to make attempts at repair of what they have damaged. And I think, again, that's where I talked about this a few weeks ago, where we're really stuck in a tough spot these days, which is trying to figure out how to hold people accountable, how to hold our leaders to a higher standard, and at the same time, how to ensure that when people do go awry and make mistakes, even ones that are hurtful, how we create the space for them to make the reparations that need to be made, right? To make the repairs, to make the apologies, to make the circumstance feel as if they have understood the error of their ways. And so I think perhaps right now, while the book of Leviticus sometimes may feel distant, I think some of these ideas, especially around the idea of the Chatat and Hasham offerings, right, these different offerings of apology, that perhaps there is a lot that we can take and we can bring into our contemporary challenges. So with that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. We'll certainly get to a little more discussion in depth in our Torah study. And a reminder again, we're going to read from the beginning of chapter 2 of the book of Leviticus, beginning with the first verse of the chapter. So if you're in the Plowed Chumash, that's 662, and if you're in the Women's Commentary, that is 574. Baruch Adonai Hamborach. Baruch Adonai Borach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah. Amen. V'nefesh ki taqrid Korban minecha l'Adonai, so let yeh korbanho vayatzak aleha shemen, venatan aleha levona, vehevia el bnei Aaron hakohanim, vekamatz misham melo kumetzo. Mi solta umishamena al kol levonata, veitir arohen et azkarata hamizbecha, isher reach nichoach la'adonai, vehanoteret min hamincha le'aharon ubanav, kodesh kadashim meishe Adonai, Vechi takriv korban minacha me'afek tanur. So let chalot matzot belulot bashemen verikike matzot meshuachim bashamen ve'mincha al hamachavat korbanecha. So let belulav bashemen matzat yeh Patot otapitim, vaitzakta aleha shemen minchahim, v'minachat marcheshet korbanecha solet bashemen te'asem, v'hemeta et hamincha asher yaseh me'ele l'Adonai. Ve'ikriva el hakohen me'yisha el hamizbeach, ve'herim hakohen min hamincha et azkarata, ve'hiktir hamizbecha, isher reach nichoach l'Adonai, ve'hanoteret min hamincha le'Aaron ubanav,
Kodesh Kadashim Neishe Adonai. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam natan b'tocheinu Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah. Well, we have our Torah in our midst. We'll take a moment to offer our Misha Berach, our prayer for healing. And in a moment, I'm going to read the names that we have on our list, but certainly also invite you to think of your loved ones at home as well. Misha Berach Avotenu v'Imotenu Abraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah v'Yivarech et HaCholim Ha'elim. We think this morning of Andrea Fagan, John Lonke, Estella Gass, Sylvia Orn, Yerachmiel Ben Hinda, Paloma Chow Han, Samuel Moskowitz, Lou's mother Audrey Luvo, Chaim Leib, Andrew Edelman, Robert Posner, Joyce Weinberg, Rick Gold, Stu Pollack, Jane London, Catherine Guarino, Emuna Chava, Raina Walsh, Deirdre Klein, Stephanie Skit, Judy Stern, Miriam Cornfield, Roz Brody, Chana Ruth Batsara, Marlise Silverberg, Susan Spruce, Bagel Tzipora Bat Elisheva, Elisheva Batsara, Richard Gambino, Michelle Sawicki, Idol Basha Bat Yitzchak, Tzvi Menachem Ben Chaim, Rivka Bat Devora, Amy and Gavin Tucker, Janice Kurz, David Dowling, Neil Elliott and Eileen Rosen, Israel Ben Yitzchak, Ben Sion Ben Moshe, Lorraine Danis, Buddy Kassoff, Shelley Newmark, David Kyle Klopman, Rivka Bat Rachel, Sarah Bat Chana, Moshe Eliezer Ben Sivia, Peretz Ben Yehuda, Leah Bat Naomi, and Tova Bat Chana. As I said, if you're thinking of anyone else this morning, you can take the opportunity to say their names out loud or simply to think about them and hold them in your hearts. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimaleh Rachamim Alehem, Lahachalimam, Larabotam, Lachazikam, Meishlach Lehem, Mehirav Shu'ah. Refuah Shlema Min HaShamayim, Refuat HaNefesh, Refuat HaGuf, Hashtabah Alav Zman Karev and Omar. Amen. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless and heal those who are suffering. May the Blessed Holy One be filled with compassion for their health to be restored and their strength to be revived. May God swiftly send them a complete renewal of body and spirit, and let us say together, Amen. El na refana la, el na refana la, el na refana la, refuah shelema. El na refana lo, el na refana lo, el na refana lo. Refuah shelema. So we'll turn to the bottom of page 370 for Hagbah and Delilah, and unfortunately, you can't already tell by my hobbling, my back is still not in great shape, so I'm not going to be able to lift the Torah fully this morning, but we will certainly do our very best to wrap the Torah again with love and care. You can join me on page 370, and we rise in body or spirit. Vezot HaTorah asher sa Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai b'yad Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. If you're still standing at home, please be seated. So this morning's Haftarah is a special Haftarah, the last of the 5 special Haftarot that are done between Purim and Pesach. And so this Shabbat receives its special name, Shabbat HaGadol, from this morning's Haftarah. So if you happen to have a Plav Chumash at home, we're looking for page 1459, Page 1459. Excuse me. And if you are following in some other form online, you're looking for the prophet Malachi, chapter 3, verses 4 to 24. So again, Malachi chapter 3, verses 4 to 24, or page 1459. First, we'll offer the blessing before we begin chanting on page 372 in our prayer books. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar b'nviim tovim v'ratzav v'divrehem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah u'b'Moshe abdo u'Yisrael amo u'b'nviei ha'emet v'tzedek. Then the offerings of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasing to the Eternal as they were in days of old, as in years long past. And then I will draw near to you for justice. I myself will be swift to witness against sorcerers, adulterers, those who swear falsely, those who extort the wages of workers, oppress widows and orphans, and who thrust aside strangers, all those who do not fear me, says the God of heaven's hosts. For I, the Eternal, have not changed, and thus you, the children of Jacob, have not ceased to be. From the days of your ancestors you have strayed from my statutes and have not observed them. Return to me, and I will return to you, says the God of heaven's hosts. Yet you say, in what way do we need to return? Can anyone cheat God? Yet you cheat me. And you say, how have we cheated you? In regard to tithes and sacred contributions, you are cursed with a curse, for you are cheating me, the whole lot of you. Bring the full tithe to the storehouse, so that there is food in my house. Test me in this, says the God of heaven's hosts. Will I not open heaven's windows for you and pour down for you a limitless blessing? I will rebuke the devourer for you, so that it does not destroy the fruit of your soil. Nor will the vine in the field be barren for you, says the God of heaven's hosts. All the nations shall count you happy, for you shall be a land of delight, says the God of heaven's hosts. Your words have been harsh against me, says the Eternal. Yet you say, what have we said to one another against you? You have said it's useless to serve God. What gain is there in observing God's service, or in walking with mourner's attire before the God of heaven's hosts? We account the arrogant happy. The evildoers are the ones who live on, and they even try God and get away with it. Then those who revered the Eternal talked to each other. The Eternal listened and took note of it, and a scroll of remembrance was written before God concerning those who revered and valued God's name. On the day that I am preparing, says the God of heaven's hosts, there shall be to me my most precious possession, and I will be tender to them as parents are tender toward their children who serve them. You shall turn back and see the difference between the righteous and the wicked, between one who serves God and one who does not serve. For behold, the day is coming, burning like an oven. Those who were so proud, who did so much evil, shall be stubble. The day that comes will burn them up, leaving them neither root nor branch, says the God of heaven's hosts. But for you who revere my name, a son of righteousness shall rise with healing on its wings. You shall break out and gambol like calves, like stall-fed calves. You shall trample the wicked, for they shall be ashes under your feet on the day that I am making, says the God of heaven's hosts. Remember the Torah of Moses, my servant, the statutes and ordinances I commanded him at Horeb of all Israel. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Eternal, to turn the hearts of parents to their children and the hearts of children to their parents, lest I come and smite the land with destruction. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Eternal. It's just so you'll know, is a very interesting difference. You see a little asterisk at the bottom. Depending on your tradition, you either read this verse or you don't read this verse, but I always thought it's important to read. We'll go back to our Sidurim, our prayer books, page 372 at the bottom of the page. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol haolamim, tzadik bechol adorot, ha'el ha'nemad ha'omer ve'oseh hamdaber u'mkayim, shekol ra be'emet v'tzedek, al ha'torah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al nimim ve'ayom ha'shabbat hazeh, shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu likdusha v'lemenucha, lechavod u'ltifaret, Al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach u'mevarchim otach yitbarach shimcha befi kol chai tamid leolam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat. Amen. We rise now in body or spirit as we turn first to page 376 to offer a prayer for our country, and then page 377 a prayer for the state of Israel. Thus says Adonai, this is what I desire, to unlock the fetters of wickedness and untie the cords of lawlessness, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. Share your bread with the hungry and take the wretched poor into your home. And when you see the naked, give clothing and do not ignore your own kin. If you banish the yoke from your midst, the menacing hand, the evil speech, if you offer compassion to the hungry and satisfy the famished creature, then your light shall shine in darkness. O guardian of life and liberty, may our nation always merit your protection. Teach us to give thanks for what we have by sharing it with those who are in need. Keep our eyes open to the wonders of creation and alert to the care of the earth. May we never be lazy in the work of peace, and may we honor those who have died in defense of our ideals. Grant our leaders wisdom and forbearance. May they govern with justice and compassion. Help us all to appreciate one another and to respect the many ways that we may serve you. May our homes be safe from affliction and strife, and our country be sound in body and spirit. Amen. We remain standing in body or spirit as we turn to page 374 as we return the Torah to the ark. Ya'alelu et Shem Adonai, ki nizkav shemo levado, odo al eretz v'shamayim, vayarem keren li'amo, tehila lechol chasidav, lifnei Israel am kerovo, Alleluia, Alleluia. Ki lekach tov natati lachem torati, al tazovu, et chaim mehi lamachazikim ba, v'tomecheha meushar deracheha, Lachein oam v'chol netivoteha shalom, Ashireinu Adonai elecha ben hashuvah, Chadesh, Chadesh yameinu, Chadesh yameinu kekedem. We remain standing in body or spirit as we turn to page 586 at the bottom of the page. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, l'ateit kedula l'yotzer breshit, shelo asanu kigoyeh haratzot, velo samanu kemishmechot adama, shelo samach elkenu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol amonam, v'anachnu koim, umishtachavim umodim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're now on page 588. Shehu noteh shamayim ve'osen haaretz, u'moshe mikaro b'shamayim imahal, u'shchinatu zo, v'gove meromim, u'Eloheinu einod, emet malkeinu hepezulato, Kakatu betorato, ve'adat hayom, ve'ashemota el levavecha, ki Adonai hu Elohim, v'ashamayim imahal, ve'al haaretz, mitachat einahu. V'nehemar v'haya Adonai, Lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo echad. those who are observing a yard site or remembering a loved one who's passed in recent months to remain standing in body or spirit. Everyone else may be seated. I think first of those who passed in recent months: Miles Ambrose, Fred Eber, Nancy Fisher, Edwin Friedman, Sandra Furman, Lucy Gladstone, Lois Herr, Phyllis Katz, Madge Judith Parcher, Steve Popkin, Danielle Lisa Rigg, Vera Shaps, Virginia Tizer, Marjorie Weinberg Berman, and Ann Weiss. We also marked the yard sites that occurred during the last week for Leonard Barron, Murray Bergman, Sally Burke, Jeanette Brown, Hyman Egelfeld, Herman Epstein, Sandra Furman, Rabbi Samuel Geffen, my grandfather, Lieb Goldstein, Carol Halpern, Isidore Harkaveh, M.L. Hart, Louis Leonard, Rita Margaretten, Pearl Meyerson, Joseph Moskowitz, Lois Rosenberg, Gussie Schenker, Sophia Schoenbach, Geraldine Scholl, Marzine Taylor, Carol Wechter. And if you're thinking of anyone else this morning who is in need of remembrance, and if you'd like to share their names, please do so at this time. And I'll ask the mourners to join with me on page 598. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach yerutei ve'amlich malchutei, v'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, v'agalav izman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'alam le'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei d'kudsha b'richu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata ta'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalom araba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing. Please be seated at home if you're still standing. Shabbat shalom, everyone. A few of our announcements. Please, of course, to join us for Torah study beginning at 12 o'clock on Zoom. And a reminder that tomorrow we'll be handing out our Passover gift bags, including boxes of matzah, which is always an important factor for the holiday. And that will be available in the temple parking lot. Again, that is tomorrow from 1:30 to 3 p.m. Tomorrow, 1:30 to 3 p.m. Reminder this week upcoming, Niddah Mitzvah will meet virtually on Monday at 11:30, Hebrew School at 4 o'clock virtually, and Social Justice Committee as well at 5 o'clock. On Tuesday at 5 is Lorraine Pepper's next art workshop, this time creating beautiful Passover matzah covers using fabric and glue. Please do contact Shelley Lichtenstein, though, to let her know that you're going to be involved, or if you have questions, make sure that you have the right materials to join with Lorraine. Reminder that my class on Wednesdays of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and his book, The Prophets, is at 12 o'clock, and then later in the afternoon, B'nai Mitzvah will meet at 4 o'clock online. The Social Justice Committee is having a Passover food drive to support local food pantries, collecting all of our unopened or newly purchased leavened, as in chametz items. Please deliver your donations now through Sunday, March 21st, that is tomorrow. Drop off is in the white shed in back of the temple parking lot. We're also asking for volunteers to help 2 families in need. Please email our Social Justice Committee at sjc@templeadasisrael.org to learn more about how you can get involved, or if you don't remember that email address, let me know and I'll connect you with Andy and Alyssa and the wonderful people who are helping to feed our needed community here. Reminder again, the first night of Pesach is at sundown, Saturday, March 27th, a week from tonight. And we hope that you'll be celebrating that first night with your family or friends by either Zoom or some other means. But we also look forward to you joining us for our community second night Seder, which will be hosted on Zoom again this year. And again, that will begin at 6 o'clock on Sunday evening, March 28th. All are welcome who are members, and if you're members, you're welcome to also invite your loved ones who may be living in other parts of the country to join us as well. Just please make sure that everyone registers ahead of time so we know who everybody is. So again, if you have any questions about that, please do let me know. Lastly, just please make sure to check your weekly e-blasts on your calendar, especially with April upcoming. We should be releasing the April calendar pretty soon. And looking forward to celebrating Pesach with you and hopefully seeing some of you online in just a bit for Torah study. So before we do Kiddush and close our service, we'll do Ein Kelohenu on page 626. Ein Kelohenu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kemalkeinu, Ein Kemoshienu, Michelohenu, Michadonenu, Michemalkeinu, Michemoshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Emalkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu. And if you'd like to join me, Kiddush is on page 604. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, lasot et ha-Shabbat, ledorotam berit olam, beini uvein b'nei Yisrael, oti leolam, oti leolam, v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. על כן ברך אדוני את יום השבת ויקדשהו סברי לחיים. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Amen. Shabbat shalom, everyone. And as said, hopefully I'll see you for Torah study in just a little bit at 12 o'clock. And if not, please have a wonderful rest of your week. And we'll see you next Shabbat. Shabbat shalom.